Welcome to God in the Wild. I'm your host, Kent Harrop. In this first season, we'll explore how nature heals, inspires, and restores us. We'll consider, too, ways in which the natural world connects with and awakens us on our spiritual journey. John Muir, the great conservationist and mystic, put it this way: "Into the forest I go to lose my mind and find my soul." Each episode will reflect upon ways nature speaks into and expands our spiritual lives. Welcome to God in the Wild. I've been thinking about this book, The Boys in the Boat, and it is subtitled 9 Americans and Their Epic Quest for Gold at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. This book was written about 12 years or so ago, and it's interviews with men now well into their old age who were part of that epic journey. They were a group of young men from the Pacific Northwest, and in contrast to many of the elite rowing schools of the Ivy League on the East Coast, they were farmers and loggers and the sons of fishermen. And so this unlikely group of people in the midst of the Great Depression, with Nazi Germany rising on the horizon, they began their quest, their unlikely quest, to challenge and beat the greatest rowing teams in our own nation, and then to challenge the great countries of the world at the Olympics, including Germany. It's a story of their quest and how they indeed accomplished the seemingly impossible to receive their gold medals. What is this book of these 9 young men who lived so long ago? What does it have to teach us as we begin to emerge from this pandemic? I'd like to share an excerpt by the author Daniel James Brown. And he meets with one of the rowers named Joe Rance, who grew up as the son of a logger and indeed raised himself as an adolescent, an orphan, and found himself in the unlikely setting of the University of Washington. It's about Joe Rance overcoming so many challenges and so many odds. And the author is interviewing him towards the waning days of his life. He just has a few months to live, and he is well into his 80s. And he's talking about the journey that he had been on, this Joe Rance. And then the author shares this: "But it wasn't until Joe began to talk about his rowing career at the University of Washington that he started from time to cry. He talked about learning the art of rowing, about shells and oars, about tactics and technique. He reminisced about long, cold hours on the water under steel gray skies, about smashing victories and defeats narrowly averted, about traveling to Germany and marching under Hitler's eyes into the Olympic Stadium in Berlin, and about his crewmates. None of these recollections brought him to tears, though. It was when he tried to talk about the boat that his words began to falter and tears welled up in his bright eyes." The author says, "At first I thought he meant the Husky Clipper, the racing shell in which he had rowed his way to glory. Or did he mean his teammates, the improbable assemblage of young men who had pulled off one of rowing's greatest achievements?" Finally, watching Joe struggle for composure over and over, I realized that the boat was something more than just the shell or its crew. To Joe, it encompassed but transcended both. It was something mysterious and almost beyond definition. It was a shared experience, a singular thing that had unfolded in a golden sliver of time long ago, when 9 good-hearted young men strove together, pulled together as one, gave everything they had for one another, bound together forever by pride and respect and love. Joe was crying, at least in part, for the loss of that vanished moment, but much more. I think he was weeping for the sheer beauty of it. This coming together in common purpose, this coming together for the common good. We know all about the challenges facing our nation. We know about the divisions between culture and class and races. We know about how some politicians have sought to focus upon that which separates us rather than that which unites us, and how it resulted in great unrest on January 6th. We know about over 585 of our neighbors dying to COVID. We know of how exhausted our healthcare workers and teachers are. We know all of that, and it is true. Yet I want to focus for a moment upon what it means to be in the boat with one another. In the midst of all the challenges, and in all the midst of the pain, and in the midst of all the divisions, where have we seen beauty unfold? Where have we seen people pulling together for the common good? I'd like to share a few stories where people have seen that they have a responsibility to one another, have bore witness to great beauty. I think of Andrew, a 28-year-old EMT in New York City, who at the very height of the pandemic in New York City in April and May and June and July of 2020, when they had the highest rate, he worked 7 days a week as an ambulance driver. And he would take people in and out of the hospitals. He would take in the living and he would take out the dead. And each night when he went to bed, exhausted after a 12 or 14-hour shift, he would worry and wonder whether he would wake up with COVID. Yet each morning he got out of bed and he went back to serve, because he said, if I don't go, who will? I think of my friend Doris Ann, a public school teacher, who has retooled again and again, learned new technology to teach to students once the lockdown occurred in March of 2020. She had a responsibility for her students. She had a responsibility to keep on showing up. She did it out of love for her students. She and her colleagues, they sacrificed their own well-being, particularly in those first days of the pandemic, and as they moved into hybrid classrooms and now into a greater sense of normalcy just in the last month. They've risked so much, and we are so grateful. I think of Doug. I think of my friend who is an oncology nurse, and of how he has served in Boston. And for 6 months, he didn't see his family face to face. For 6 months, he didn't want to put at risk his wife, who had an underlying health condition, and their 3-year-old son. And so for 6 months, he worked each day at the hospital, tending to those with cancer, and sometimes rotating in to treat patients with COVID. He did this again and again and slept in a hotel room. And once he felt it was safe, once or twice a week, he would go and stand on his front lawn, and his wife would open the windows, even in the midst of the winter, and he would talk to his wife, and he would talk to their 3-year-old, letting their little boy know that one day Daddy would come home. It's been said in Scripture that perfect love casts out fear. It was out of love that Doug and Doris Ann and Andrew served. I think those type of lessons about sacrificing ourselves, about serving for the well-being of one another, are lessons we want to carry. We want to remember that it isn't about me, it's about us coming together for a cause greater than ourselves. In the book, The Boat, the author says, it was a shared experience, a singular thing that had unfolded in a golden sliver of time long ago, when 9 good-hearted young men strove together, pulled together as one, gave everything they had for one another, bound together forever by pride and respect and love. He wept for the sheer beauty of it. I don't know about you, but I don't want to go back to the way things were before COVID, with this vast distinction between those who have and those who don't, about the lack of access of healthcare for everyone. I don't want to go back there. I want a more equitable society where wealth is distributed more widely and opportunity for work, a livable wage, is available to everyone. We talk about essential workers during the pandemic, how oftentimes they are paid the minimum wage, of how they have to cobble 2 or 3 jobs together to bag our groceries and serve our packages. I don't want to go back to the way things were before the pandemic. Do you? It's an opportunity for us to move into the future as a new people, to recognize that we are in the boat together, to recognize and honor those moments of sacrificial love and generosity for the well-being of everyone. May we each do our part, commit ourselves to getting in the boat with one another. Thank you for listening to this episode of God in the Wild. Please share this episode with friends and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. You can follow God in the Wild on Facebook and Instagram at God in the Wild Pod. You can subscribe online and leave us a rating and review. This podcast is a production of the First Baptist Church of Beverly, Massachusetts. In the spirit of John Muir, go out into the wild and find and feed your soul. I'm Kent Harrop. Thanks for listening.